Falling leaves, football, Halloween. God, Halloween's right here too. And trade deadline, which is actually on Halloween.
Yes. What? Which is interesting.
Yeah. Thank God the trade deadline is not like on April Fool's Day. I hate April Fool's Day. Worst holiday on the planet. We got Bradley Chubb, Christian McCaffrey, Roquan Smith, Calvin Ridley, all traded last year. This is a big name trades. Yeah. Let's talk who should be buyers and who should be sellers. Brady, you can go first. Who should be a buyer at the deadline, and what should they be looking for?
Here's the hard thing about answering this question. And when I was thinking about this, if you're a team that's got a losing record, right, we would all assume they should be buyers because they would be wanting to load on talent to try to make a run, or maybe you're 500 or something like that.
Yeah.
The problem is like, unless you need a skill position player, like I just, it's going to be such an expensive move to make. Mm-hmm. I think that's why you don't see a ton of buyers in football. That on top of the fact that it takes them oftentimes really long to allow that player to like work into the system and have the impact that you're hoping for. So I think there'll be more sellers than buyers, but I think much like the housing market right now in this economy, you're not going to see a whole lot of movement. Like you're just not going to see a whole lot of transactions taking place.
Interest rates to the like having to like the cost to acquire, and then like the acclimating the system, which would be the interest rate too high.
The cost of debt obviously right now is impacting the housing market. We can get off that subject, but to your point, draft capital.
Whatever you say, Dr. Quinn.
Yeah, draft capital is like your interest rates, right?
Yeah,
and what they're asking is going to be far too high. So, I'm when I was thinking about, all right, who would be big buyers? I'm like, oh well, New England or some of these other teams, like maybe Minnesota or maybe someone else like that, where Kirk Cousins said like, hey, I'm not going anywhere, and like they've only played one divisional game. Maybe they feel like they want to try to keep loading up. Denver, given the position that they're at, the wide receiver play hasn't been stellar. Everyone wants to throw shade on Russell Wilson. Outside of this past week, he's actually played well this year. He has not been the problem there. So Denver's cutting guys loose. Do they look to bring anyone in on defense? Or is it like a team like the Miami Dolphins who's up as one of the best, but could they add on a couple more pieces? So it's hard to predict this. I don't really have any like hard, like this team's a buyer. I mean, right now I'd say this. I don't know how much longer Deshaun Watson's going to be out with his shoulder injury. PJ Walker didn't look great last week. Dorian Thompson-Robinson didn't look good before that. They might want to look at trying to find a backup or someone they do feel good about going after and getting, because that defense is the best in the league or up there next to San Francisco. And that might be the thing that holds them back from having a better seed or a potential playoff spot.
Yeah, it's interesting because you've got, like, you look at this, it's the part of the problem for the NFL with the trade deadline is we start these talks, we finished 6 weeks of football, right? And as you point out, like the Jaguars this time last year were 2-4, and the Jaguars went on to win the division and make a big run. So you can't definitively say, and they acquired Calvin Ridley, but he couldn't play. You look at the AFC, and you can go down as far as the 14th team in the AFC, the Tennessee Titans, at 2-4. I mean, they're 2 games out of first place in their division. Like, the Titans are going to be like, well, and now maybe if Ryan Tannehill was out for the year, you consider something different if you can get like actual value in return. But Mike Vrabel's not I'm going to give up and just call the dogs off at 2-4 type of guy. I don't think so. Really, like New England and Denver on the AFC side, especially if we're having a 4D chess battle between Bill Belichick and Sean Payton for tanking, which may or may not be the case.
Yeah, but by the way, who are you tanking for?
Exactly.
I don't know. Caleb Williams suddenly like 3 picks in the first quarter against Notre Dame.
It hasn't been 3 picks. He hasn't played well this year, especially when under duress and under pressure. Go look at the stats. I mean, it's and when you put on the tape and you watch it, you're like, all right, if we can get to him, he hasn't played as well.
Yeah.
Hey, Drake May, he's fine.
I'll put it this way: a lot of people that I've talked to, some have Drake May higher, and it's not something that they advertise. Yes.
Oh. May has been a lot better the last 2 weeks since he got Tez Walker back too. And Tez Walker plays a similar spot to like Josh Downs. Like Josh Downs was his guy last year.
He's been great for Indy,
Yeah, exactly. On the NFC side, actually, we'll stick on the AFC side, dudes, because you've got look, your team 3-3. I mean, there's talk about Aaron Rodgers coming back. Let's be realistic.
I think more so, Brady talked about who's going to be buyers, who's going to be sellers. I think it's still too early in the season to determine that. But I think, there could be player swaps that make a lot of sense for both teams. So essentially, both teams are gaining something by swapping out players. I think the Jets swapping out Carl Lawson for Hunter Renfrow makes a lot of sense. I mean, Randall Cobb has struggled in the slot for them. Now we know he's Nathaniel Hackett's guy. He could be a guy that's going to be a leader, but they've needed more out of that slot position. I think we talk about Garrett Wilson, right? And I love that they've almost force-fed him the ball the last couple of weeks. He's been upwards to 12 targets per game like the last two weeks. I think they still need something in that slot. They're missing something in that slot. Hunter Renfrow essentially not being used at all with the Las Vegas Raiders right now because they brought in Jacoby Myers, who plays a lot in the slot as well. I think that makes a lot of sense. The Jets have a very deep D line. Yes, they did restructure Lawson, so you got to see and tinker with that to see what that looks like as far as training, player for player in regards to Hunter Renfrow and Carl Lawson. But to me, that makes sense for both teams. The only thing is they play in about 3 weeks, so would they be willing to make that trade knowing that they're about to play each other, or do they wait till right before the trade deadline to do that swap?
I think the other thing is with the Jets is like, are you really building things for this year? I mean, if I'm the
Aaron
Jets,
Rodgers is walking around in week 5 throwing footballs.
Yeah, but I mean, I get it, but then it begs the question: like, are you still in the playoff hunt if he could come back by week 15? I don't know. But the other thing is like you're going to pay a premium if you're a buyer right now, right? Like there's not going to be a lot of
Well, that's why I said the player for player swap makes a lot of sense here.
Well, again, and that's a theoretical player.
Yeah,
I'm more presenting the point that. Like, I think a team like that, like, I'm not sure that they're really trying to if they do anything, think about this year more so than the actual future. And so then you've got to take into account, like, what's the contract situation of the person you're trading for. And,
I think they're both technically free. I know Hunter's free after this year. And I think, Carl, you can get out of his deal after this year.
Well, let me ask you this. And this is sort of like not directly related to the trade deadline, but I mean, it's also like, let's say, I mean, I don't think this is going to happen. Aaron Rodgers comes back and plays in the playoffs. Like, I think that's insane. Like, this is not an ACL would even be pretty tough, but an Achilles, man, like at his age, I understand he's ahead of schedule and all that. If Zach Wilson gets him to 9 or 10 wins and Aaron Rodgers can play in the wild card, is he like, I mean,
well, let's do this. Look at their schedule.
Yeah,
they're a 3-3 football team right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like, what number do they need to get to? 10 wins? I think you have to assure yourself.
But if I would say,
I think 10
11, you'd have to say for sure you're getting in.
For sure.
10, it might be still iffy, right? You have to win the right 10. So
yeah,
go through the
Chargers at home, one of those big 10. Like, like you beat the Chargers at home. I mean, in 3 weeks. Like, yeah.
They have the Giants next, Chargers, then Raiders the next 3.
So they can win 2 of the next 3.
Like they can possibly win all 3. I mean, I think with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, them going 3-3, I think people were going to say that was going to be a tall task just because of the schedule and how it came out. So I think with Zach Wilson going 3-3, you look at it and say, while defense is still playing top level now, they've given up too many yards, but we're getting the turnovers that they weren't getting last year, right? So as long as you can continue to get the turnovers, and you would think without having Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed and those guys coming back, that they would elevate their game too as well. So again, Zach Wilson, has he taken a step? Yes, right? Do they need him to continue to take steps? Obviously they do. But as long as he's not turning the football over with that defense, you still have a chance in any game.
So they've got those 3 games, Giants, Chargers, Raiders. Then they have at the Bills and the Dolphins at home. I think if you can be 6-5 through those games, then you consider yourself very much a playoff contender with Falcons, Texans at home, at Dolphins, Commanders, at Browns, at Patriots to close out. Like,
yeah, I mean, so
you
the
may have
schedule's
to beat
favorable down the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, like at Browns, at Patriots is not a great way to close it. Like if the Jets have 8 or 9 wins going to New England with a 19 game losing streak on the line, like that's
like that playoff streak. I was so sick that they lost that game. And that game, honestly, Brady, and we talked about this, that game might come back to bite them this year, literally.
I mean, if they lose both times to them, I just, good heavens.
If Belichick, that's like Belichick's Super Bowl. If he knocks out, it's like Belichick loses the number 1 overall pick, but like takes the
especially
Jets
if they only have like 1 win going into that game versus us, like versus the Jets. Like,
yeah. All right. Other possible buyers, Brady. Let's say you're the GM. I could see either one of you guys being GMs. It'd be fun. Just like mostly like I want to see Brady's a GM just so he's like antagonized by local reporters. Like I feel like dudes, you don't want to be the GM of the Jets. That seems like a job. It's like you're just asking too much of a human being's soul to be the GM of the Jets for a long haul. If you're like the Atlanta Falcons or the Washington Commanders, right? You're running those teams 3-3, or like the Chargers. Just don't want anything to do with it. Packers, Vikings, like one of these teams where they're on the fringe of the playoff race. Do any of those teams interest you, Brady, as a possible buyer?
I think the Packers would potentially, but like they're not even a big player in the offseason or free agency. I mean, I know Brian Gutekunst said that 1 year, but that was about it. And so it's hard to think that they're going to make some big splash or big moves. Teams seem to want to look into the players that they have. The Vikings are an interesting team, but they've got a lot up in the air too. When you think about after this year, Kirk Cousins becomes a free agent. Mm-hmm. He's already reportedly said he's not going to waive the no trade clause. He wants to stay in Minnesota, so he's not going anywhere. Maybe they can hang around and stay competitive once they get Justin Jefferson back.
Should they trade Justin Jefferson?
I don't think so. I mean,
no.
My thing is he's too good of a player, whether Kirk Cousins is there after the season or not. Correct. And so if you're going to go take a quarterback in the draft, you better have two guys to throw to in that sort of offensive firepower with Kevin O'Connell calling plays. So I just think it's interesting. Like, I think Minnesota's kind of curious to see what next year looks like. I think a lot of the teams that you named are in that position. So it's hard to then want to go all in on trying to make some last minute moves. Like, I think you're either looking at buyers being teams that are already strong, maybe already in the running, or like can get someone who they're just trying to cut for cap space purposes or whatever the case is the rest of the season, like a la the Denver Broncos. Like, hey, Frank Clark, they're letting him go. All right, sweet. I mean, if you're that was just an example of like an edge rusher that's played well, extremely well in the postseason. And if you're a postseason team, you're now a buyer, right? Like, you're invested into this. So maybe like a team like the Lions or something, there's some of these teams that I think are right there that are 5-1 that want to get over that hump, or maybe a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, like, someone wants to part ways or move on from another wide receiver they feel like could maybe come help. Great. All right, let's go find ways of bringing him in to help us be that much better. So I just, it's tough to get a sense for like who that's going to be, because I think there's only a handful of teams that maybe even fall into that category.
Dudes, the Panthers are a team that 0-6, gonna be done. Don't have a first round pick. Need to get some draft capital back. Yep. Any possible partners for the Panthers?
Yeah, I wrote one down. I would love to hear what Brady thinks about this. The Bills, they lost a really good linebacker, Matt Milano, right? Frankie Louvu is a free agent after this year. Now, again, they could see him as part of the future.
Like that.
I love the way that he's been multiple as far as being an edge guy and in the box linebacker. I think a guy like Sean McDermott would love to have him on his team, a guy that he can line up all over the place. I think that makes a lot of sense, depending on if Carolina doesn't see him as a piece for the future, which they probably do because he is a really good player. But if they could maybe get him for maybe a third round or maybe a 4th, 5th round pick.
Damn,
he's playing really well, Brady. You talked about it. What teams are selling right now, they want teams to overpay for a player, and we talked about it. The Bills feel like they're a Super Bowl contending team. And if they feel like maybe, not having Matt Milano, if we get Frankie Louvu in here for 1 year, are we willing to part with a 4th or 5th round pick, to get him?
Yeah, I think in this case, you're saying like 5th, 6th round, some, kind of later on. But to your point, I think that's the right track, right? Like, you got the Buffalo Bills, who clearly been decimated with injury. Go call up some teams.